Classification of computing devices. That's the next topic we're going to be looking at. So, how can you classify computers? Now, computers were classified or are still classified based on the generation the computer is from, the size, the purpose, and also the type of computer we're looking at. It also helps to understand their technology, advancement, physical dimension, and also intended task and architectural difference. All these parameters are actually used to classify computers. Computers may look alike, but they have these individual things or these individual properties that actually distinguish them. So we're going to be looking at the classification of computers based on their generation. So first generation of computers. So the first generation of computers is from the 1940s and 50s. So in the 1940s and 50s, it saw the birth of computers. These first giants like ENIAC, which we've talked about in previous slide, and UNIVAC used bulky vacuum tubes for calculations. Remember, we talked about the fact that it's not just about their generation, it's about the technology, what they used, what kind of technology that actually made them to be used or useful, and who actually set them apart from each other. It wasn't just about the generation, it was about the size, the technology that was used. Also, we have second generation computers, which was from the 1950s to the 1960s. And it brought about a revolution in computing because it wasn't using the previously bulky tubes. Instead, in the second generation of computers, which was invented by the Bell Laboratory, and this particular generation of computers used transistors rather than using the bulky tubes, which generated a whole lot of heat in a particular spot. So the Bell Laboratory scientists named Bardeen, Brattain, and Shockley, three of them were responsible for building these new generations of computers and made sure that they actually replaced the bulky tubes with the transistors. Also, we also have the third generation of computers, which was from 1960s to the 1970s, and it saw another giant leap. Instead of using large integrated circuits, because the previous generation of computers, which was the second generation of computers, was using transistors. In this case, it used integrated circuits. In most cases, you may hear people talking about IC. The IC of this device is bad, or the IC of that device. When we're talking about ICs, wherever you hear ICs, they're talking about the integrated circuits, which was able to pack multiple transistors into a single chip. And this was a very big leap. So these tiny transistors, as was invented in this third generation, they packed a lot of transistors in them. And then they were put into a single chip, which made the actual process of making computers smaller to become a reality. So with these transistors being used, it aided the development of programmable or programming languages like COBOL and also Fortran, which allowed programmers to be able to use symbols that were a little bit in between computer languages and human languages in order to use them to program the computers. Now, the four generations of computer actually brought about the development of microprocessors, and this happened in the 1970s. So these were a composition of tiny chips, essentially a whole CPU. Now, at first, these CPUs and CPUs, you may ask, are central processing units, were larger. But with the advent of the microprocessors, it made it easy to put an entire CPU onto a single chip. And it paved way for the personal computers, because back then, the computers were so large that it was something that a single individual wouldn't have the finances or wouldn't have the space to keep them. And now we look at the fifth generations of computers. The fifth generations of computers is actually the current generation of computers we are living in right now. The current generation of computers focuses on artificial intelligence, and we're seeing artificial intelligence everywhere. AI for short, basically. But AI is something that is everywhere right now. It's something that, like the ChatGPT that exists, that can actually help you with your homework, and also the AI that can be used to generate images. So the AI helps to do complex things, almost like a human being would. But the thing is that the AI is not able to do exactly how a human being. It can't think outside of the box. Basically, it only does what it was programmed to do, and it's actually learning. It's actually in the learning phase. But the fifth generation of computers, as you should know, is the advent of adding artificial intelligence to computers, giving it the ability to not just be a brick that sits there and waits for you to tell it almost everything to do, but it still works on a set of instructions that helps it to do the things it's supposed to do. So, classification of computers based on size. So we have the microcomputers. Microcomputers or personal computers, or for short, we can just call them PCs, are the compact and affordable machines we know now, the ones that you could just go to a place and then get them. We also have the mini computers, fitting between microcomputers and giant mainframes. These machines were workhorses for businesses because they were more affordable. It was easier for these businesses to put them into a smaller space, and then also it consumed less power. That's electricity. Mainframe computers. These were the heavyweights of the computer world, and the mainframe computers were massive, big machines built for immense processing power. And imagine handling mountains of data and complex calculations for a giant organization or a company or even a government parastatal. This machine was actually a workhorse that was completely capable of handling each and everything that it was given to do. Okay, so classification of modern computers. That's the next thing we're looking at. So we have personal computer. So desktops, laptops, tablets, handhelds. Handhelds in this case could be an Android phone that you're using. Could be a personal digital assistant device. These devices rely on storage components like hard drives, or you could call them HDDs. Most people call them HDDs, or solid state drives, which most people know them as SSDs, to store data and operating system. So we also have the workstations. Now, the workstations and mainframe, not just the workstations, they were more like about the same thing, but there were still some features that actually made them different. So the workstations and mainframes are often large storage capacities to handle extensive databases and complex computing tasks. These were tasks that were so intense that the personal computers would actually break down in the process of trying to process these things. So the workstations and the mainframes often have large storage capacities because this was necessary. Imagine a device that actually handling data from a very large corporation, say Dangote. Let's say Dangote is a company who is using the mainframe computer. Definitely Dangote has sub-companies that has to do with cement, has to do with salt, has to do with sugar. Now, all the data of how to improve the quantity of cells and all of those things, you would need somewhere with a lot of storage to be able to store these things and still be able to process a whole lot of information. This is where we had things like large amounts of RAMs, and they also had specialized input and output interfaces. So big corporations actually use this, and it had to have a very big storage. Now we also have wearable devices. While the wearable devices are actually useful, the wearable devices are typically limited due to their small size. It's going to be difficult to have something so small, yet it does so much. But at least it was able to still do a whole lot as compared to the 19th century computers. So it had the basic things like the processor, the memory, sensors that were useful, like let's say your smartwatch that can tell your heartbeats, that can also tell how many steps you've walked. It's able to do most of those things, and it's mostly used for monitoring health and receiving notifications. Nothing really fancy about that. You can't really use it to play games if you wanted to. And even if you could, it's not going to be fun. You will need an actual device to play games with. So the supercomputers have massive storage capacities and utilize high performance storage technologies like parallel file systems. In this case, the file systems were like having storages that face each other, and you can actually store things on either side of this. So we have digital computers. digital computers the most common type, and it had the processing data in binary format, and it also relied on digital components like transistors and logic gates. So you could also find that these digital computers were better than analog computers. So, in summary, we've looked at classifications of computers based on their size, based on the generation they belong to, and also we've looked at classification of computers based on generation. Basically, that's what we've actually looked at. We've looked at the classification of computers based on size. Now, size actually matters when it has to do with classifying computers, because the classification of computers, a laptop cannot be completely classified exactly how a mainframe computer or a supercomputer can, because the supercomputers can work on trillions of instructions per second, but the laptop is not going to be able to have that particular processing power to actually do that. So we also looked at the classification of modern computers. The modern computers, like the laptop that most people have, you may not have yours, but laptop computers. So the laptop computers are an example of the modern computers, the small laptops, the big laptops, the ones that can play games, the ones that can do a whole lot of processing, the ones that people actually use in certain companies to do graphics designing, even the ones that actually used to write exams. So that's how far computer has actually gone from a century ago, where it was something that was only used by brilliant individuals, people who were scientists, people who were engineers, people who were mathematicians, to the state where it's now something that almost anybody can have in their hand. So that's how far computers have been. So that's it for the summary for this particular topic. Thank you for listening.